Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident rower who's respected by your peers. You can become the athlete you want to row with. I'm Rebecca Caroe, and I'm joined by Marlene Royle.
Hello, Rebecca, and hello to our Faster Masters rowing audience.
Well, it's delightful to be back in the sort of swing of things. As people know, I've been traveling and I just got home, hideous jet lag, to the extent that I got up at a ridiculous time in the morning and did my filing. Like,
oh gosh,
what else are you going to do at 4 a.m.?
I know. You have to think of the day's very long when you start at 4 a.m.
The day was extremely long. Let me tell you, I've been awake for some time, even before the 5 a.m., 4 a.m., 3 a.m. Oh my God. Anyway, someone said to me, which was actually very constructive, even if you're just lying in bed, you are resting, even if you're not asleep. And actually that counts towards your rest. It's like sort of taking a nap, you know?
Yes. Well, the tennis player, Maria Sharapova, when she rests and during a tournament, she is always horizontal. She's always off her feet. And sometimes after a major tournament, she's, except for minor movement, she's horizontal for like 24 hours. So major rest.
There you go.
Yes.
There's advice from Miss Sharapova. Now, this week, the sponsor of the podcast is the 5K head racing program. Although it's high summer in the Northern Hemisphere and midwinter in the Southern Hemisphere, we need to plan our season ahead of time. So if you're going to be racing this autumn, you might want to consider buying a specialized training program for 5K and other long distance races. Faster Masters has successfully prepared athletes for long distance races from the head of the river in London to the head of the Yarra in Australia and the Charles in the USA. If you want to do well, or just if you want to do better than you did in previous years, you need to be well trained and prepared using a program suitable for Masters. We sell a 12-week training plan just for long distance races. It's a standalone water or erg program, and it includes a taper week and race plan guidance, as well as day-by-day workouts. You can buy it online at fastermastersrowing.com/our-courses, and it's called the 12-week head racing program. And you're going to want to be getting it now because 12 weeks isn't long to prepare before the early season head races. Now, this past week, actually, before I go full screen, I just want to show you this glorious photograph. This is the Bridgewater Canal in the UK, and it's a photograph sent up by Henry Law, and he and his colleagues did a row right along the canal, and this particular part is a bridge. You can just see on the edges where our logo is. It's a bridge over the Manchester Ship Canal, so two canals crossing one above the other, and as you can see, they didn't have much margin for error in terms of width at this point.
That's a very cool picture.
And in fact, the full picture, it was a portrait picture, so I've cropped it for today's purposes. But the full picture shows they've got 4 scullers in a row. So I'm pretty stoked with that. Now, this past week, a ton of things has been going on. Marlene, why don't you kick off?
Well, I've been having the pleasure of introducing lots of masters to rowing this week. So have been doing a lot of learn to row sessions in singles. So that's been fun because it is the peak of the summer. And in this month's issue of Rowing News magazine is my article, which is called The Periodisation of Technique.
Now I'm intrigued. I've no idea you could periodize technique.
Of course you can. Of course you can. Depending on what your racing season is, what your technical focus is. in terms of, base training can be base skills. And as you pick up speed work skills. So, or having different times of year when you emphasize certain parts of technique, and then maybe you have a harder training period where, doing a lot of technical work isn't the main goal. I mean, you always do some, but then when you get back into your racing period, you're sort of a sharpening period where you want to go back and like sharpen some of those technical points that, when you're getting a little bit rested before races. So
that's so cool. For myself, this past week, I've had a lot of correspondence with people, and I just want to highlight a couple of messages I've had. For those of you who are on our email newsletter list, last week I sent out a message that was called the Beginners Rowers Joining Your Club. And I got a reply from Georg Grutzner, who replied to say this was excellent content. So thank you, Georg, for your feedback. I also have had a really interesting correspondence with one of our super fans called Tony, who said, first and foremost, I find your chat simply fascinating. Your style enhances the enormous depth of your combined knowledge, and there's something of interest in every single session. I particularly appreciated the sessions on the stroke cycle for a number of reasons. I've been off the water for 2 years, and so I'm relearning my technique. So these chats are of enhanced value for me. He also talks about being a club coach in a previous life and having at the time no particular relevant background knowledge apart from coaching a Learn to Row program. And he did a lot of research, and that was where he discovered Marlene, you, and your book called Tip of the Blade. And he said this really supported my coaching, and the crews did reasonably well, comforted by the positive feedback I got from some of the athletes. And he said the series on the rowing stroke cycle reminded me of all the research I'd done. In particular, I was fascinated by the last of the series, blade placement at the catch, where I relived my coaching. I had intuitively understood the fundamental idea that the entry is the final action of the recovery, which Marlene explained much more clearly than I ever did. But it was a superlative expose for which I thank you both. Now, if you want to get that, it is available for free on our website. If you just go to our courses page, you will find it. There's a link there and you can download it for free. We do ask you to register in order to get it, but there's no charge.
Great. Thank you, Tony.
I was also given a book on my travels, and I love rowing books, as I'm sure most of you know. And one of the things that I particularly love about this is that it is a rowing photography book. It's by a Dutch photographer called, and I'm going to mangle his name, Merijn Soeters, and it's called The Big Picture, with a subtitle in Dutch, which I'm not even going to try to say, but it basically says rowing photography. And it's all about rowers from the Netherlands, which is obviously where he's based. And I just want to show you a couple of pages of these just glorious pictures. So take a look at that. Isn't that amazing? All of those wind turbines and just a little 8 going down the middle of a Dutch canal. And here's the second one that I want to show. So anyone who's a fan of Dutch rowing may know that they have a university boat race. But this photograph is after the finish of that race. But more than that, Dutch rowing fans are crazy, like they're out there nutters. And one of the things they do is they like to swim out to the crew. So take a look at this. Can you see all the swimmers in the water?
Oh, gosh.
So right down there, right at the bottom, there are just all these little heads, and they're swimming out to try and get to the crew that's just won the boat race. So anyway, I commend that book to anyone who's a fan of, of rowing and rowing books and rowing photography. Moving on, there's another email in your inbox if you are on our newsletter list about our podcast name. I'm not going to go into any detail, but do go have a look, find it, and please hit reply and tell us what you think. It's quite a big question for us, and although it is, our decision, consulting you, the audience, is really important for us. So we would appreciate any feedback that you can give. Now, we have a very special guest who's joining us today from the Swan Creek Rowing Club, Ted Pytlar. Ted, welcome. Ted has frozen.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, there he is.
Excellent. We were slightly worried that you were just sitting really still.
There we go.
Now, Ted is a masters rower and he's the chairman of the Swan Creek Rowing Club. And we thought it would be quite fun just to invite him on to the show, just so that we can find out a little bit more about him and how he runs the club and his own rowing. So Swan, what's your name? Ted. Ted, can you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Hey, well, I'm actually the president of Swan Creek Rowing Club. I've been a member about 16 years. I started rowing in 1970 as a walk-on at Rutgers University, and became a lightweight rower through 1974. And we were a fairly successful crew. And then I coached the women's program. I was one of the original coaches of the women's program for the first few years in the late 70s when Title IX came into play. And then I left rowing to pursue my life. And 25 years later, my son went to Boston University and became a rower. So that got me going again. And I've been rowing since 2005. And first rowing sweeps, and in the pair a lot, and raced a lot in pair, and we're pretty successful in that. And we won a few Masters national championships in the pair, and won one event at the FISA World Championships in 2006 in Mercer Lake. And then I switched to the single, and have been much less successful, but really enjoying the process of trying to get better in the single, and in spite of getting older, I still am managing to get better, I think. And I never thought in my years of not rowing I'd be able to row again, and be able to row again regularly is really a gift. I really love it, and really thankful that we have our club here, and that I can participate in the club.
Of course, you come from the generation that learned to row sweep, and I count myself in that as well. And coming to sculling kind of late in your rowing career, what encouraged you to make that switch, Ted?
Well, the single is always the ultimate boat, right? Always the hardest boat to row, and those were the stars of rowing, and it's always, viewed it as a challenge. So I wanted to try and get in it, and try to do that. And I've really enjoyed the challenges of rowing the single. It's been an all-consuming, as everyone knows, compulsion as well as a sport.
Did the club already own single sculls, or has the club had to make some changes in their fleet of boats?
No, we have a pretty good fleet of boats. I should know how many, but I'd say we have about 30 boats in the club. We have about 140 members, and we have a mix of singles, doubles, quads, and eights, and fours. And the mix of the boats has changed as the interest of the rowers has changed. We have an active youth program with about 30 or 40 participants, and the rest are masters. And, with COVID, the interest in rowing singles has perked up quite a bit. And a number of people who previously didn't row singles started and bought their own boats. And, so that has changed. But we try to follow what our members need and want, and, keep our fleet up pretty good. We have a fairly decent fleet. We never buy new boats, but we do buy new boats. I'm sorry, we buy some new boats and some used boats. And then we replace the boats that are getting very old, and they get heavy usage, so some of them get pretty beat up after a while.
I think that's the function of a really lively club, that your equipment is much loved, much used, and you get value for money.
Yeah, I know.
Yep.
Lots of new Orlocks every year, right? This kind of thing. So.
Yeah, well, we're on the Delaware River, about an hour north of Philadelphia, and the Delaware is a rocky river, and the elevation of the river changes a lot with rainfall and so forth. So right now, when we've had very little rain, it's very shallow, and we tend to get a lot of gouges and knocked off skegs, and from our club too. And we got a couple bridges that people like to scrape the bottoms on. We have that kind of thing happening.
Yeah, we've all experienced that. And interestingly, one of the things, talking about skegs, in my trip to the UK, quite a lot of the eights racing at Henley Royal Regatta have two skegs. They put one obviously at the stern in the normal place, but they also have one under the two-seat, which is designed to help the boat track in a very straight line when you're on a flowing river. And to help keep it true. And one of the coaches that we were chatting to said that the athletes knock this one off all the time. It drives us nuts, but it is just glued onto the bottom. It hasn't got a rudder or anything. And he said, so they wrote a program for a 3D printed version, so they can just print another one, and it costs 50 cents, and they glue it back on again.
Good idea. I never had heard that before.
Now, Ted, you're an active rower as well as the chairman of the club. What are you personally training for at the moment?
Well, our sprint season is basically concluded now. There was, regattas all over the place, in the United States, but the races our club typically participates in are over. There was one that would have been this weekend in Philadelphia called Quaker City that was canceled due to low registration. So now we're focusing on head race preparation. So we've got until September until the head races start up, and we're switching gears into that, which is tough because it's also very hot and humid here. So rowing long pieces is pretty arduous right now.
Do you have to get up super early to train when it's cooler?
Not that much. I row with we train with three other scullers, and we're sort of in a pattern of not getting up that early. So we row about 9 o'clock often. Sometimes I'll row at 7 or 7:30. When I was working, I used to row at 6 o'clock, so I could get over with it. And, there are a lot of advantages to rowing early, no doubt about that. But if you're going to race in the heat, it's also good to row in the heat. So, that's what you tell yourself anyway.
How do you organize yourselves, this little pack of scullers?
Oh, it's just 2 men and 2 women. And, oftentimes people organize themselves around who's on the same wavelength, has the same schedule, has the same interests, So 3 of us are retired. One's not retired, but has a flexible schedule. We all like to scull. We all want to, train to compete and try to improve. So that's just the way it's broken down with us. Sometimes some people join us. Our river is not that wide, so it helps to have not too many people sculling next to each other at once, especially when it's low, because you have to channel yourself into the places where there's deep enough water to row in. So
I guess you're really good at steering and looking round.
Well, we're good on our river. We're a little spoiled because our stretch of river is fairly straight. So, what we do, we know where the rocks are, and we make sure that we have a new member introduction program where we make sure to orient them to the river and show them where the rocks are and make it very clear to them where they are. And, as you know, a crack in a hull is $1,000 often, and 4 or 5 weeks out of commission, there aren't that many people around to repair boats well. So, that's a very important thing to us, is knowing where the rocks are.
There's a rowing race course here in New Zealand that is a hydroelectric dam, and obviously is a flooded river valley. And there was a very prominent rock that was just after the finish line of the 2K course, and it was above the water by a foot or so.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, a lot of it underneath the water, and crews had to stop really quickly if they were in the middle lanes because of this rock, and they arranged to dynamite it to get rid of it, so that it was low enough below the water surface that a rowing boat could go over the top.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe, Ted, you should find your local demolition firm. And
That was
we
really nice.
need to dynamite about 1,000 tons of rock. Nothing's firm. It's all loose and it all moves. So when we have hurricanes and stuff, we always have to resurvey the river and figure out where the rocks are. They haven't changed that much, but there are some changes.
it sounds like hurricanes are a regular hazard in Delaware.
I think definitely in the fall it can be pretty volatile weather sometimes. That's for sure.
Yeah. Now
I think he's
we have a temporary hiatus.
Yes.
Sorry, I lost the picture there.
Okay.
I had to open the door.
You're back. But yes, managing the weather and hurricanes. I mean, that's definitely. I think it's a good topic for club safety as well, because after a hurricane, you probably have very high flow, changes in the river. All of these things that members. I was just recently writing about developing peripheral vision and how important that is for sculling. And you obviously need to use your peripheral vision a lot on the river just to have the sense of changing landmarks. Where are other people? Steering in a relatively small space.
Yeah, well, the river height changes a lot too. So very strict rules about when you can row, and it gets to a certain height, it gets dangerous, and we don't allow anyone to row. And we have a lot of rules about when novices can row and can't row, and who's a novice, and how many oars have to be on the water, and all those things, because obviously one accident is a catastrophe.
How do you categorize your novices at your club?
A learn to row program every year, and it's gotten very popular with COVID also. So I'd say that every week of the year, all year, we have at least 2 people contact us about learning to row, and we've established a waiting list. And we have one learn to row program a year, and we limit it to about 16 people because we're a small club, and our coaches they're paid, but they're not professional coaches, and so we're always little. We don't have an excess of coaches available. So we have a program. We have a structured learn to row program that several weeks of erging, in the spring before we got on the water, and then we put them in boats. And we have about 10 sessions you get in the initial learn to row. And what we realized that wasn't enough. We would teach people to row, and supposedly they knew how to row, and as you don't know how to row that well after 10 sessions. So we have sort of a learn to row plus now, where we try to keep them involved and give them more coaching and start to integrate them into the more experienced boats. Some of the people who can get in there more quickly and not, disturb the boat too much, and some other people who can. Then some people will want to migrate towards sculling. Then maybe some people might want to go in with the sweeps. Some people want to be competitive. Some people don't, So we try to accommodate all that and do a better job of just instead of just saying, okay, you had 10 lessons, you're on your own, figure out who to row with.
That is the challenge.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Being a college rower is very fortunate. Having gone through, 6 weeks of training for 4 years and knowing how to row is a great benefit, being a master's rower. There are some rowers who I know who were learn to row people who are excellent rowers, for sure. But it helps, and we've also tried to, related to that, beef up our master's program and try to get it more organized lately. We've had some board members who are doing a very good job of trying to get a more structured master's program so they go out regularly and give people a chance to row, and try to also give them a chance to compete, get better and compete, the ones who want to. But that's always a struggle as well. People are in different wavelengths. Some want to compete, some want to compete, but not as they're not as hot about it. And some people would rather just row, socially or recreationally. And so that's, with a limited pool of people to draw from, you're always sort of trying to get things organized and give people what they want as in the experience, we keep trying.
It takes a lot of personal attention to do that.
It does, yeah.
Because someone may be a novice but have a lot of sports experience, and they learn how to row much quicker versus, say, someone who is coming to learn to row and it's their first time, and they're going to maybe just move at a slower rate and they need more time. And taking the time to try to customize as best you can that track for each person. I mean, I think there are not always a lot of clubs who are willing to take that little extra effort and do that. But I think it goes a long way in building your membership for, that, so that you've got people renewing their membership and coming back from year to year because they're having a good experience and it's meeting what they want to do, whether it's social, recreational, starting to compete, competition. There's a lot to manage in a master's program for sure.
Yeah. Nutrition every year from the learn to row from one year to the next, which is natural. But we want to make sure they work hard, so it's all volunteers. And I think bigger clubs have an easier time. You just have a bigger pool of people to draw from to get them involved. So if you have a 6 a.m. Tuesday row, you can get a boat out most of the time. Sometimes we're down to 4s or whatever, because you just have a limited number of people who are doing it.
Ted, tell us as much detail as you can about how the club board has organized that transition from learn to row into the main group.
Well, we have people on the board who take up certain jobs on the board. So we have one person who's primarily a learn to row coordinator who communicates with the people who say they want to learn to row, who coordinates with the coach, who's another member of our club, but not currently a board member. And, when the coach isn't available, gets substitute coaches and so forth, and communicates with the people and deals with the issues. And we have sort of a curriculum for learn to row that we follow, and certain for scullers we have a skills test that you'll have to go through to be certified to use a boat on your own at the end of the process. Not so much for sweep. And then we have a board member who is coordinating the master's program in coordination sort of with the learn to row coordinator. And they worked hard this past winter to try to get input from the various master's rowers on what they wanted to do to improve the experience and get people organized and get things rolling for the on the water season, get boats out. And so they go out 2 or 3 times a week now, which is good. And I think everybody's fairly happy with that, so it takes the effort, but there's always, just figuring out how to pay for it, how you're going to pay, who's going to pay, do you get your money back if you can't show up, all those kinds of things. And we had one experienced group of rowers who've been, with the club for decades who who have sort of lost some group of their group because of the new masters group being formed. That's a little more organized and goes out a little more. So there's been a little friction on that and trying to make everybody happy with what's going on. It's never totally possible. I feel like if you always show that people you're trying and you care, that's the best thing you can do. A lot of it is also getting good coaching, just getting good, consistent coaching, and that, as I said, we don't have we don't, like some clubs, I think, maybe hire a full-time coach, and that coach says, this is what you do, and this is how it's done. We're more laissez-faire in our club. Everybody sort of figures it out their own, and the coaches, sometimes we'll bring in a professional coach now and then, or once or twice a month, but the people who are handling the bulk of the Learn to Row and the Masters are just members of the club. Who have other jobs.
Yes, exactly. This is not your day job.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell us, have you had any big insights recently? Because one of the things is a theme that Marlene and I come back to over and over is how often in our own rowing and our own coaching, you come back to something for a second, third, fourth, whatever time, and you get a new insight into it. Does that happen to you?
Oh yeah, well, I'm always trying to have insights. I was trying to figure out why I was going so slow in the single years. But I think, for example, switching from sweep to sculling, as I said, I was a fairly successful sweep rower, and I thought I knew how to row pretty well, and I did have good knowledge of it. But what I didn't realize in terms of insights in sculling is that I didn't know how important it was to get absolutely rock solid feeling of stability in the single, particularly at the full reach catch and at the release, in order to really execute the rest of the stroke. If you're always, if you're not solidly stable, you're always rowing short, you're getting caught at the finish, and it's a lot more difficult for me to get those things straight than in a sweep boat. And also realizing that there are some very subtle mistakes you can be making with regard to how you do things on port and starboard with your body, or your application of power, or your shoulders are, your release, and so forth, that can really mess you up. And until you figure that out, you're always having trouble. And it took me quite a while to figure it out. I had some good coaches look at me who never really noticed certain things about my rowing, that once I figured them out, I have improved dramatically in the last few years based upon those things. Loose hand, I'd say loose hands also on sweep in sculling boats is critical. Loose hands, don't over grip, because you can't execute the sculling stroke with tight hands. You can't execute it with sweep rowing either, but you can sort of last longer sweep rowing with tight hands than you can in sculling. So there's a bunch of things. As you know, it's just everything. But there are a lot of little insights. But yeah, one of the people who I scull with is one of our Learn to Row people from several years ago, and he has said that he had an insight himself. He said that you got to be at a certain point in your rowing to realize certain things, or hear certain things from the coach. They might have said that to you when you were learning at an earlier stage, and you didn't get it as well. You might have gotten it, but not the full, complete impact of it. And so as you get better, you can come back to those things and realize better what they meant. That's very true, I think.
Yeah, circling back to things, and certainly from a coaching point of view, when you have a first or second year sculler and they're progressing, and then you circle back and maybe you say a phrase, you say a phrase that you said when they were learning, but it went right over their head, and now they're like, oh, okay, the handle's moving in an arc. Yes.
Yeah.
handle is moving in and out. But they don't, at first they don't understand this because they're thinking, my legs are moving linearly, but my upper body, my arms have to move in an arc pattern. And, sorting that out from a coordination point of view is pretty challenging at first because they want to row into the release like the erg. And if you hand straight and you row into the release as if you're on an erg, as you're going to pull your weight off the riggers and your collar's going to come away from your oarlock. And then it's a whole cascade of events at the release that become quite dramatic. And then you sort that out and start getting oriented to, okay, well, my upper body has to do this and my lower body has to do this. And then they have each thing at the right time. So
yeah. I think it's important too to try to get yourself an understanding of the complete stroke, every little piece of it. And I gotten in the habit of I got my list of how to row, how to scull, which I've updated over the last 5 years, and now it's about 4 pages long. Some things I cross out, said, yeah, that's not the way I think about it anymore, and I add things, and because you have to know, there has to be that picture in your head about what the stroke looks like, what does it feel like, and if you got the wrong picture in your head about it, and what the rhythm of it is, and what the look of it is, you can't do it as well. Once you get the picture in your head, then you can, especially when you're self-coaching, like a lot of masters do, then you can execute it better.
Yes, I would agree. If you can visualize what you want your blade to do or what you want your rhythm to look like, your body will find a way to fill that space. But if you don't have any idea what you want your blade to do before you place it in the water, it's impossible to achieve that because you don't know what you're looking for. So I think that's always a good challenge when someone is having an issue, regardless of what their level of sculling is or rowing is say, I ask them, well, what are you thinking of? Like, what are your cues to do this? If you're having trouble with X timing, what are you thinking about? And then you find out that, they get to a certain point in the stroke and then they get lost. And that's exactly why they're having the issue because they have, either need a visual example or a written example, however they learn. But I think that having that big picture is really critical. Yeah.
So you're also, some people too would just sort of adopt technique that is sort of coping, so they stay upright, and that leads to a lot of bad habits as they try to get better because they're still got those coping effort mistakes they're making, they have to realize that was just because they were afraid of tipping over.
Yes, absolutely. Then you have to convince them that these coping mechanisms are actually causing them more problems than they realize, because if they could remedy them, the boat would be much happier, right? It would do what you want it to do. So let it move naturally.
Right, yeah, like over gripping. Yeah.
How many years, Ted, did it take you to feel comfortable in your single?
I always felt fairly, well, I'd say after the first 3 years, I always felt fairly comfortable, but I always had these problems that I couldn't solve, and figure out how to make the boat go better. So I'd say I've been sculling about 11 years. I'd say in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been getting very comfortable. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? You think, imagine saying that to one of your juniors, go, in 11 years, you'll feel quite good. And they're sitting there going, I'll be really ancient in 11 years' time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you're a junior or college person, you're probably getting coached a lot, and hopefully you've got a good coach and you're serious about it, you'll advance a lot more, than doing things wrong and not knowing it and repeating those things you're doing wrong just because you just never dawned on you, or you had the wrong idea about things. One of the things this year at Insights I had, I don't know if it's true or not, but I always thought you had to have that hole behind the blade as you rode, that swirling vortex, and was pointed out to me another theory of it is don't have that. Bury the blades deeper. Get the shaft about 10 or 20 centimeters in the water, and keep them lower. And that really has helped me. I have a more stable boat that way, because I used to wash out on port all the time, and I never realized I was doing it. I always thought I was rowing equally on both sides. And I stick the blades in the water a little deeper, it stabilizes the boat a lot better.
Certainly
But that's,
does.
I think there's a difference in opinion, especially between the North Americans and Europeans and the down under people, about different aspects of the technique, I think.
There are many, many ways.
It's good to know them all, though. It's good to,
Yes,
yeah,
and
it's
to
good
find
it's
out.
good to know them all, so you can try. Yeah.
And it helps you sort out different rigging issues too, because sometimes when a blade is washing out, sometimes it's a height issue, and it's in this case it's not your fault,
Mm-hmm.
which is nice to sort out sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes too, but it's worth
Yeah, yeah.
it's always worth experimenting.
Right.
And if
Ted,
it goes better, it goes better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ted, it's been a delight
Yeah.
having you join us on the podcast. Thank you ever so much for your
That's great.
insights.
Thank you.
And
I appreciate it.
we wish the Swan Creek Rowing Club all success for your future. And yes, stay in touch.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, if you've heard something today that's been helpful for yourself, your rowing, your club organization, your board, please consider supporting this podcast. Marlene and I carry the cost of all of the broadcasts, the equipment, the storage, the hosting, and a small contribution each month from our regular listeners is very much appreciated to offset those costs. And we know that you enjoy listening because you get great tips from wonderful people like Ted. Please go to fastermastersrowing.com/podcast, where you can make a donation each month, and donations start at just $1. Now, I'd like to just wrap up by saying, on the plane coming back from my overseas holiday, I watched the Heart of Champions movie. This is the one that was recently made by the Winklevoss, or funded, or the Winklevoss twins were part of the organization. I don't know if they wrote the script or just funded the movie, but it's about a university team that gets a new coach and what they do and what happens to them during the course of the year. So it's based very much on a fictional North American university. And it has so many good aspects in it that are just, if I can say boldly, better than your average rowing movie. I'm sure everybody has spent time yelling at the screen when you get a rowing movie that gets things so badly wrong that it just makes you want to cry with frustration. But this one manages to do incredibly well with a lot of cool things. So like there's one little scene where they row blindfold. Instead of just shutting their eyes, they actually physically put on blindfolds. And actually, if anyone's ever tried that, it's an extremely good technique for helping people to feel the flow, to feel the rhythm. And there's a lot of excellent insight into how to build a team when some members are more reluctant than others. One of the athletes in the movie is a transfer in from another program who is not keen to row, but has to do it in order to keep his scholarship. And how the group manages to accept an outsider who's becomes an essential part of the team is really interesting. And there's a fabulous motivational moment when the new coach takes the crew to look at the trophy cabinet from past years. And I'm not going to spell out what happens, but it's a really nice technique that keeps them focused on the end goal, as well as obviously the process goals as you go through the season. There are some kind of slightly interesting things. So there's a great storyline about the stern pair being the team within the team. And that's, always a challenge in a crew boat. You don't really want to have a team within a team, but equally there are times when you really need a kind of Mr. or Miss Motivator as part of the overall group. And that's really powerfully used as part of the storyline. They have a great name for their boat. It's Bellator, and I won't explain that. But when the coach comes out with them in their early outings, they have a really bad row. And, any rower will empathize with this. And he sticks 2 lines of electrical tape onto the bows and basically tells them that if they can keep that tape above the water, they'll be rowing well if he can see 1 line, but they'll be rowing excellently if he can see 2 lines of tape. And it was just, again, it's a great bit of technique, but it's also a fabulous motivator for a newly formed crew who's just had a bit of a disappointing outlook, which I think was really, really interesting. One of the things that I think the movie addresses incredibly well is a common theme in an awful lot of sporting achievement, which is a parent who's trying to get involved to either, to live through their child or to inappropriately direct people under their power to do things in order to favor their child, and giving poor advice that undermines the coach. And this is a really strong storyline, and I actually think the movie addresses this incredibly well. It's something that comes up over and over again, and being a good sporting parent is not easy, particularly when people have had a very limited view of sport themselves and think they know better than the paid coach, which for me is always a big no-no. You have to trust the coach and let it run from season to season. But this is just a really, really superb insight. So anyway, there you go. Heart of Champions movie. The Winklevoss brothers were involved with it. And a lot of the actors who learn to row really look quite convincing. They have managed a extremely good, rowing stroke. And I'm going to tell you why. Linda Murray was the coaching consultant. And Rory Copus was the coxswain coach as well, and Linda as the rowing coach. So actually, it's no surprise to me, since we know both of those people, that actually these people probably learned to row very quickly and extremely skillfully. So there you go.
Well, how do we watch this movie?
I don't know around the world. I'm guessing it must be maybe on Amazon Prime, maybe on some of the streaming services, but it's called Heart of Champions. And I definitely commend it. It's, for me, good storytelling, good filming. There are a couple of kind of slightly irritating things, like in the really opening sequence where they have a race, the starter says go and the boats aren't straight. It's like no coxswain in their right mind would start with an 8 where 2 bows are converging. I mean, it makes for a beautiful overhead shot from a drone camera, but actually it's like, no, that I'm sure you could have corrected that. And there are some slightly weird things.
Obviously they should have taken our Racing Starts Challenge webinar.
They should definitely have taken our Racing Starts Challenge. One of the things that I think is so interesting was that they had a sort of a shot of the coach in a former life. And what they did was they took the face of the actor and they pasted it on top of this, slightly poor photograph, which is New Zealand's Olympic gold medal winning 8 from 1972. So if you look at it in the movie, and it comes up a couple of times because it's like framed and on the wall in the coach's room in his office, it's Stern Pair, where they've changed Tony Hurst. And I'm sorry, I don't know the name offhand of the 7-man. And coincidentally, this photograph was like in the New Zealand Rowing magazine just for this month. So that was pretty funny. That they happen to use that particular image, but it's a good black and white photo of a heavyweight men's crew. And they're rowing pretty well. So. Oh, there's one bit where I really think they got the storyline wrong. So there's a couple of irritations where things like you see the shot of the 8 and they're rowing with different oars. They're using Greyer sweeps at one point and then they switch to concept sweeps and it's supposed to be the same outing. So that's a little bit odd. Then they have this brilliant scenario where there's a bit of a tussle of personalities and they re-rig the boat in order to swap 7 and stroke. And the new stroke is still on stroke side. And I thought that was a teensy bit unrealistic that they switched 2 athletes and that someone would be that good and then still would then be rowing on the other side. But anyway, these are small finesses that the average member of the public, I am absolutely sure, wouldn't even spot.
Very good. Very good. Well, we definitely like to hear about more rowing movies, especially when they're good ones and not corny, so.
Exactly. We don't need any more corny rowing movies. So this has been Faster Masters Rowing Radio, the show dedicated to masters athletes who want fun, fitness and confidence in their rowing. You can become a student of the sport by buying a Faster Masters Rowing Program subscription today at fastermastersrowing.com/join. Until next time, bye-bye.